The first strange moment of that day happened in a hotel hallway that smelled faintly of lilies and furniture polish. I was standing in front of a mirror in the bridal suite bathroom, fixing my lipstick, when my husband said through the half-open door, "Claire, I need you to listen to me carefully. If anything feels off tonight, don't eat." For a second, I thought he was joking. I turned and looked at him. Daniel was still in his suit, one hand resting on the doorframe, his face calm in that way it always was when something serious had already settled in his mind. He worked as a fire captain, and over the years I had learned the difference between his ordinary voice and the one he used when he had already seen enough. "What are you talking about?" I asked. He did not answer right away. His eyes moved to the hallway behind me, then back to me. "I'll explain when I can," he said. "Just stay close to me." Then he stepped back and let the door fall softly shut. I remember standing there with the lipstick still in my hand, looking at my own reflection and feeling a small, cold space open in my chest. My younger sister was getting married that afternoon at the Seabrook Grand in San Diego. It was supposed to be one of those family days people remember for the right reasons. My mother was downstairs. The guests were arriving. A string quartet had been rehearsing since noon, and my husband had just told me, in the quietest voice imaginable, not to eat. At the time, I had no idea that before the night was over, a hotel incident report, a catering log, and one camera angle from a service corridor would change my family permanently. But I didn't know Daniel well enough to understand one thing. He would never say something like that casually. I put the lipstick down. Then I waited. A minute later, I walked back into the suite where my sister was standing near the window while two women adjusted the back of her dress. Her name was Elena, though most people called her Lainey. She was 4 years younger than I was and had always been the kind of person who could fill a room without raising her voice. Even as a child, she had moved through life as if doors opened a little more easily for her. That day she looked beautiful. The dress was simple from the front and more detailed at the back, with small pearl buttons and soft lace along the shoulders. Late afternoon light was coming through the curtains and catching in her hair. "There you are," she said, smiling at me through the mirror. "I was starting to think you'd abandon me." "I would never do that," I said. And I meant it. For most of our lives, I had been a steady one. I handled details. I remembered birthdays, appointments, medication schedules, insurance forms. When our father got sick, I became the person who drove him to cardiology visits, sat beside him during long afternoons, and learned how to read his expression before he admitted he was tired. Elena came when she could. I never kept score. At least I told myself I didn't. After our father died 6 years earlier, we became closer in some ways and more careful in others. Grief does that to families. It softens certain edges and sharpens others. Our mother was seated near the window, dabbing the corners of her eyes with a folded tissue. "You both look lovely," she said. "Your father would have been proud to see this day." The room got quiet for a moment after that. I walked over and adjusted a loose strand near Elena's ear. "How are you feeling?" "Nervous," she said, then laughed softly. "And hungry." One of the bridesmaids said, "That'll be fixed soon enough," and everyone smiled. I smiled too, but I heard Daniel's voice again in the back of my mind. "If anything feels off tonight, don't eat." I tried to set it aside. Weddings create tension all by themselves. Schedules slip. Staff ask questions. Family members cry in corners. Men in suits wander around looking for cuff links. There are always 100 harmless explanations for a strange tone or a vague warning. Still, when I left the suite and headed toward the chapel, I found myself paying closer attention than usual. The hotel corridor was cool and dim compared to the bright room upstairs. I could hear the muffled rise and fall of conversation from the lobby below, the clink of glass being arranged for cocktail hour, the low hum of air conditioning through ceiling vents. Near the service elevator, 2 catering staff pushed a silver cart past me covered with white linen. One of them nodded politely. I nodded back. At the entrance to the chapel, Daniel was waiting near the side doors. He did not touch me. He only looked at me once, briefly, like he was checking whether I had understood him. Then the music began, and all of us turned toward the aisle. I took my seat in the front section, folded my hands in my lap, and told myself to stay calm until I knew what, exactly, I was being calm for. Then I saw Daniel glance past the altar toward the reception staff gathering near the rear doors, and the expression on his face made it impossible to ignore that something had already started. The ceremony itself was beautiful in the way well-planned things often are. Everything moved on time. The flowers were exactly where they were supposed to be. The candles along the front rail gave off that faint warm scent of wax and greenery. Sunlight came through the side windows in long pale bands and settled across the aisle runner. The violinist played softly enough that people could still breathe and shift in their seats without feeling like they were interrupting anything. Elena walked in on our mother's arm, and for a moment I was able to forget the whole way, Daniel's voice, all of it. She looked happy, not excited in a loud way, settled, certain. Her fiancé, Marcus, looked at her the way people hope to be looked at least once in their lives, openly, with no performance in it. He owned 2 restaurants in the city and carried himself with that polished ease people develop from years of hosting other people's celebrations. But at the altar, he looked stripped of all that. Just a man trying to stay composed while the person he loved walked toward him. I should have been fully inside that moment. Instead, part of my mind stayed somewhere slightly behind it, taking notes without permission. Daniel sat beside me with his shoulders relaxed and his hands loosely linked, but I could feel how attentive he was. Every so often his gaze moved, not toward Elena or Marcus, but toward the side entrance, the service doors, the hotel manager standing near the back. It was subtle. No one else would have noticed. I noticed because I had spent 12 years watching him return from long shifts and knowing from the way he set down his keys whether the day had been ordinary or not. When the vows began, I leaned slightly toward him and whispered, "Tell me something." "Not here," he said. That was all. So I sat back again and kept my face still. I have always been good at that. When I was a girl, people used to call me serious. What they meant was quiet. What they eventually learned was that quiet and unaware are not the same thing. Elena and I had grown up in Orange County in a house that always looked finished from the outside. Our mother kept everything neat. Our father believed routines solved most problems. Elena was the bright one, the one teachers remembered and neighbors asked about. I was dependable. I was the one adults handed things to. Permission slips, house keys, grocery lists, later, medical paperwork. By the time our father became ill, that pattern had already settled in place. I never blamed Elena for it, at least not in any clean, simple way. Families create jobs for each person without announcing it. One person comforts, one avoids conflict, one handles details. One gets praised for being spontaneous, while another is praised for being capable, which is often another way of saying useful. During our father's illness, useful became my full-time role. I left work early for appointments. I learned medication names I never wanted to know. I sat with him in waiting rooms that smelled like coffee, sanitizer, and old magazines. I kept a folder in my car with insurance notes, test results, and handwritten questions for specialists. Elena came to some holidays, some Sunday lunches, and one hospital visit I remember clearly because she cried in the parking lot and said she hated seeing him like that. I believed her. After he passed, there was paperwork, of course. There is always paperwork after a death. But I let most of it move through attorneys and accountants because I did not want money stitched too tightly into grief. Daniel reviewed a few things with me at the kitchen table one night, mostly because he is careful by nature and had a habit of reading every page put in front of him. I signed what I needed to sign. Then life kept moving. That memory came back to me in the chapel not because I was thinking about inheritance, but because I suddenly remembered Elena asking, about a month before the wedding, whether everything from Dad's estate had been fully finalized now. At the time, the question had seemed casual. Sitting there with the minister speaking and Daniel watching the room instead of the altar, it no longer felt casual. When the ceremony ended, everyone stood. There was applause, then laughter, then the soft release people make when they have been holding emotion in public and are relieved to let it out in safer shapes. Elena kissed Marcus. Our mother cried openly. I did too, though less than I expected. Daniel put one hand lightly at the center of my back as we moved with the crowd into the corridor leading toward cocktail hour. "You're scaring me," I said quietly. "I know," he said. The honesty of that answer landed harder than reassurance would have. In the lobby, servers moved through the crowd with trays of champagne and small hors d'oeuvres balanced on one hand. I took a glass but did not drink from it. The room smelled of citrus, perfume, chilled wine, and fresh-cut flowers. Somewhere behind us, a photographer was directing cousins into uneven rows. Elena was glowing beneath the hotel garden lights, while Marcus laughed beside her, one hand at her waist. From across the room, she caught sight of me and lifted her glass in my direction. I lifted mine back. Daniel spoke to Marcus's mother for a minute, then to one of the catering supervisors, then drifted toward the ballroom entrance as if he were simply making polite conversation. But that was not what he was doing. I could tell by the way he kept his expression neutral and his questions short. When he came back to me, he said, "At dinner, don't switch plates with anyone. Don't taste anything from anyone else's dish. And wait until I sit down before you touch your meal." I stared at him. "Daniel," he lowered his voice. "Please. There are moments when a person realizes the situation is serious not because they understand it, but because someone they trust has stopped leaving room for interpretation." So I nodded. Then I set my untouched champagne on a passing tray, smoothed the front of my dress, and followed the rest of the family into the ballroom. At our table, the place cards were already set. Mine was between Daniel and Marcus's aunt. Elena and Marcus were at the center table under a hanging arrangement of white roses and candlelight. From where I sat, I could see the kitchen doors at the far end of the room. Daniel could see them too. And when the first course was cleared and the main plates had not yet come out, he became so still beside me that I knew whatever he had been waiting for was finally in motion. By then I had stopped trying to convince myself I was imagining it. The ballroom was full and warm, the kind of warmth created by too many people, candlelight, and hotel staff moving in and out of swinging kitchen doors. Glassware caught the light every time someone lifted a hand. Silverware touched china in small bright sounds. At the far end of the room, the band had started a soft instrumental set that sat under the conversation without competing with it. On the surface, everything was exactly as it should have been. At our table, Marcus's aunt was telling me about a trip she and her husband had taken to Santa Barbara the year before. Across from us, my mother was smiling politely at one of Marcus's cousins. Elena was moving from table to table with practiced ease, touching shoulders, leaning in for photos, accepting compliments like someone floating inside a day she had imagined for years. And Daniel was watching the kitchen doors. Not constantly. That would have been obvious. He looked down at his napkin once, asked for more water once, even smiled when Marcus stopped by the table and squeezed my shoulder. But his attention kept returning to the same place. I followed his gaze only once and saw nothing unusual. 2 servers stepped out carrying trays. A banquet captain checked something on a clipboard. One chef in a white jacket disappeared back through the doors. The movements were quick and ordinary. Then Elena appeared near the service entrance. She wasn't speaking to guests. She wasn't laughing or posing for pictures. She was standing half-turned toward a man in a chef's coat, saying something brief and direct. He nodded, looked down at a paper in his hand, then looked toward the tables. I felt a tightness move across my shoulders. It may have meant nothing. Brides asked questions all evening. They checked timing, cake placement, dietary meals, speeches. But something about the angle of her body, the way she did not linger, stayed with me. Daniel leaned slightly toward me without taking his eyes off the room. "Keep your hands in your lap when the plates come," he said. I did. A few minutes later, the servers began setting down the main course. White fish, lemon sauce, fingerling potatoes, green beans. It looked elegant and harmless, the kind of meal designed to offend no one and impress just enough. The plate placed in front of me looked no different from the others. Daniel did not touch his food. Neither did I. He picked up his water glass, took one small sip, then set it down exactly where it had been. I knew that habit. It meant his mind was working through sequence and timing. I had seen the same precision at our kitchen counter when he sorted storm updates, station schedules, and insurance claims after a fire. He believed in steps. He believed in not moving too early. Finally, he said, "I need you to trust me for about 3 more minutes." My voice barely moved. "Do you think the food is dangerous?" "I think your plate may be." The room did not change after he said it. That was the strange part. No music stopped. No one dropped a glass. No dramatic silence opened up around us. My mother was still talking. Elena was still smiling across the room. Someone near the dance floor laughed too loudly at something a groomsman said. The ordinary evening stayed ordinary while my body went cold from the inside out. I looked down at the plate in front of me. The sauce had been spooned carefully over the fish. There was a wedge of charred lemon on the rim. A scattering of chopped herbs. Nothing about it looked threatening. Nothing about it looked different. "Why?" I asked. Daniel's answer came quietly. "Because I watched the bride speak to the banquet chef. Because I saw him separate one plate before service. Because I saw him add something from a small bottle after the other plates were already finished." I could not immediately speak. He went on in the same measured tone. "And because your sister glanced at your place card before she walked away." My fingers tightened together under the tablecloth. I have had a severe peanut allergy since I was 19. Not an inconvenience. Not a mild reaction. A real allergy, the kind that closes your throat and shortens time. Most people close to me know that because once they have seen it matter, they do not forget. Elena had been there after my first serious reaction. She had sat in the emergency room with my mother while I shook and coughed and tried to breathe through the medication haze. If there was one fact about me she knew without effort, it was that. Daniel looked at me then for the first time in several minutes. "What I saw was peanut oil," he said. "I'm almost certain." Almost certain. It was such a careful phrase, and it frightened me more than a dramatic one would have. Daniel was not a man who attached certainty to things lightly. If he said almost certain, it meant he had already checked himself more than once. I kept my eyes on the plate. Somewhere across the room, Elena laughed again. I heard it distinctly over the band, and the sound split the evening in two. There was the version everyone else was living inside, and there was the one opening under my feet. "What do we do?" I asked. Daniel answered immediately, as though he had already decided. "Step 1, you do not touch the food." I nodded once. "Step 2, we leave the table quietly." My breathing had become shallow. And step 3, he looked past me toward the kitchen, then toward the ballroom entrance, where the hotel operations manager was standing near the wall. Step 3, I make sure this becomes a documented event before anyone has the chance to clean it up. That sentence steadied me, not because it made the situation smaller. It didn't, but because it gave the moment structure. There was still a floor beneath me. There were still actions. There were still rules. I placed my napkin carefully beside the plate. At that exact moment, Elena turned and looked toward our table. For 1 second, maybe 2, our eyes met across the room. Her expression did not change. Not in any obvious way. She still looked composed, almost glowing under the reception lights. But she did not wave. She did not smile. She only watched. Then Daniel stood up beside me, slow enough not to draw attention, and said in a voice that would have sounded ordinary to anyone else, "Come with me." So I rose, left the untouched plate exactly where it was, and walked with my husband toward the side exit while the music continued behind us and the ballroom carried on as though nothing at all had happened. We did not rush. That was the first thing Daniel insisted on once we stepped away from the table. If 2 people leave a wedding reception too quickly, everyone notices. If they move slowly, speaking quietly to one another, people assume they're heading to the restroom or taking a phone call. So we walked at the pace of ordinary guests. Behind us, the band moved into another song. Plates continued to arrive at nearby tables. A server brushed past carrying a tray of wine glasses that chimed softly together with each step. The ballroom doors opened and closed in their steady rhythm as staff passed between the kitchen and the floor. Nothing in the room suggested danger. That was exactly what made the moment feel unreal. Daniel placed his hand lightly at the center of my back as we reached the corridor outside the ballroom. His grip was steady, not urgent, but it carried the same quiet authority I had seen when he directed people away from a building during a fire call. Once the doors closed behind us, the noise dropped to a distant murmur. "Keep walking," he said quietly. The hallways smelled faintly of carpet cleaner and warm air from the vents. At the end of the corridor, there was a small sitting area with 2 chairs, a decorative table, and a tall window looking out over the hotel parking structure. We stopped there. For the first time since dinner had been served, Daniel looked directly at me. "I need to confirm something before we do anything else," he said. My throat felt tight, but I nodded. "Have you eaten anything tonight that came from the kitchen?" "Anything at all." "No," I said. "Just water and champagne earlier." "Did you try any of the appetizers?" "No," he exhaled slowly. Not relief exactly, but something close to it. Then he took out his phone. "What are you doing?" I asked. "I'm documenting time and location," he said. Daniel had always been careful with records. It was a habit from years of incident reporting. Every call he responded to eventually became a written report. Time, conditions, observations, actions taken. He opened the Notes app and typed a few lines while speaking quietly. Reception dinner service began approximately 7:42 p.m. fish course, delivered to table 8 at approximately 7:58 p.m. One plate observed being treated separately in kitchen prep area prior to service. He paused. Bride seemed communicating directly with banquet chef while referencing guest seating. The calmness of the process was strangely grounding. "Daniel," I said softly, "you could still be mistaken." He nodded once. "Yes," he said. "That's why we follow procedure." Procedure. That word mattered. It meant he was not acting on anger or suspicion alone. It meant he was creating a record before anyone else controlled the narrative. He looked down the hallway toward the ballroom doors. "Step 1 was making sure you didn't eat it," he said. I folded my arms lightly around myself. "And step 2. We notify the hotel before the plate disappears." "Won't that cause a scene?" "It might," he said. "But if someone intentionally added an allergen to a guest's meal, the hotel will want to know immediately. Liability alone guarantees that." He wasn't wrong. Hotels take food safety very seriously, especially when it involves allergies. Even the possibility of contamination forces them to respond quickly. Daniel scanned the hallway, then nodded toward a small office door labeled Event Operations. "I saw the banquet manager go in there earlier," he said. "If he's still inside, we talk to him first." My stomach tightened. "Do we mention Elena?" "Not yet." That answer came instantly. "We describe exactly what we observed," he continued. "Nothing more. Let them secure the plate and check the kitchen." The logic was simple and careful. No accusations. Just facts. Then he added quietly, "If it turns out I'm wrong, the worst outcome is an embarrassed kitchen and a delayed dinner service." "And if you're right?" I asked. Daniel didn't answer immediately. Finally he said, "Then someone planned something that needed the chaos of a wedding to hide it." The sentence sat between us in the quiet hallway. For a moment I thought about my sister again, about the dress upstairs, the childhood birthday parties, the hospital waiting room years earlier, the way she had looked across the ballroom only minutes before. My chest felt heavy, but my thoughts were clear. "Okay," I said. Daniel gave a small nod. Then he knocked on the event operations door. Inside, we heard a chair move and footsteps approaching. The door opened a few seconds later to reveal a middle-aged man in a dark suit with a name badge pinned neatly to his lapel. His expression was polite but curious, the way hotel staff look when guests appear in staff corridors during a formal event. "Good evening," he said. "Can I help you?" Daniel's voice stayed calm. "Yes," he said. "My name is Daniel Brooks. My wife and I are guests at the Harrison wedding reception in the ballroom." The manager nodded. "Yes, of course. Is there a problem with your table?" Daniel paused just long enough to make the next words deliberate. "There may be a food safety issue involving a severe allergy." The manager's posture changed immediately. "What kind of issue?" Daniel gestured gently toward me. "My wife has a life-threatening peanut allergy. A few minutes ago, I observed a member of the kitchen staff add peanut oil to a specific plated dish before it was served." The manager blinked once. "And that dish was served to your wife?" Daniel answered carefully. It was placed in front of her. She did not eat it. The man's face lost its polite event smile. "Please wait here," he said quickly. He stepped back into the office, reached for a radio, and spoke in a low voice. Within seconds, the quiet hallway began to change. 2 kitchen staff hurried past toward the ballroom. A second manager appeared from another corridor. Somewhere behind the kitchen doors, someone raised their voice sharply. Daniel remained beside me, still and steady. And for the first time since we had left the table, I realized something important. Whatever happened next was no longer private. The system was now involved. Once hotel management stepped in, the evening stopped feeling emotional and started feeling procedural. That helped me. One of the assistant managers asked us to move into the small office so we would not be standing in the hallway. The room was cool and brightly lit, with a desk, 2 filing cabinets, and a faint smell of printer paper and coffee that had been sitting too long on a warmer. Someone closed the door behind us, and the noise from the reception dropped again to a dull, muffled layer in the distance. The banquet manager introduced himself as Eric. He had a legal pad in one hand now, and the expression on his face had shifted from hospitality to risk assessment. "I need you to walk me through exactly what you observed," he said to Daniel. Daniel did not dramatize anything. He never does. He gave times as closely as he could. He described where he had been standing in relation to the service doors. He explained that he saw the bride speak briefly with a chef, then saw one plate separated from the others. He said he observed a small bottle being used on that plate after the rest had already been garnished. He described the bottle as one he recognized as peanut oil from prior emergency experience involving food reactions. Eric wrote all of it down. Then he looked at me. "And your allergy is documented with the hotel?" "Yes," I said. "I gave notice when I RSVP'd, and my sister confirmed she had passed it along to the planner." He wrote that down too. A second manager came in a minute later and said quietly, "The plate has been pulled." I felt my shoulders drop a fraction. Not because anything was solved. It wasn't. But at least the evidence was no longer sitting unattended at a reception table while servers cleared dinner service around it. Eric asked, "Did either of you mention your concern to the bride or groom?" "No," Daniel said. Good. It was not said harshly, just plainly, like a man who understood how quickly stories can get rearranged once people begin talking. He asked one more question. "Do you believe this was intentional?" Daniel looked at him for a second before answering. "I believe the plate was singled out. I believe an ingredient dangerous to my wife may have been added after final plating. I'm not going beyond that until your team confirms what was used." Again, that calmness mattered. He was not trying to win the moment. He was protecting the facts. Eric nodded and said, "That's the right approach." Then he stepped outside to make another call. I sat down in one of the office chairs and looked at my hands. They were steady, which surprised me. Inside, I felt shaken in a way that was difficult to name. Not panic exactly. More like a quiet collapse of something I had assumed was true for so long that I had stopped examining it. My sister would never do that. That sentence had lived inside me without effort. Now it was sitting broken on the floor, and no part of me knew how to pick it up. Daniel crouched slightly beside my chair, not enough to make a scene of comfort, just enough to meet my eyes. "You're doing fine," he said. "I don't feel fine." I know. That was one of the things I had always loved about him. He never reached for false reassurance when the truth was harder and more useful. A few minutes later, Eric returned with another man from hotel security. Security wanted a statement too, brief for now, more formal later if needed. Daniel repeated the sequence almost word for word. I added what I knew, the allergy notice, the seat assignment, the fact that I had not touched the meal. Then the security officer asked, "Does anyone else at the wedding know about your allergy?" "Yes," I said. "My family does. Close friends do. My sister definitely does." He wrote that down and did not comment. Time moved strangely after that. I could hear none of the details from the ballroom, only the soft rise and fall of the band, occasional applause, doors opening and shutting, footsteps in the corridor. People were still celebrating 50 feet away while hotel staff secured a plate, reviewed kitchen handling, and began preserving camera footage. Eventually, Eric came back in with a tighter expression than before. "We've confirmed peanut oil on the dish," he said. The room went still. He continued, "Our executive chef is reviewing who handled the plate. We are also pulling service corridor footage and kitchen prep footage where available. At this point, we are treating this as a serious incident." He said a few other things after that: liability, documentation, guest safety, law enforcement if necessary, but I only caught pieces. Peanut oil on the dish was enough. The rest arranged itself around that fact. Daniel asked, "Has the chef said why it was added?" Eric hesitated just slightly. "He says he received a direct instruction that the plate required a special finishing oil." "From who?" Daniel asked. Eric's eyes shifted briefly toward me, then back to Daniel. "He says the instruction came from the bride." No one spoke for a moment. I think Eric understood instantly that we were past the point of misunderstanding because he added, "We have not yet completed the full review." That was fair. Necessary, even. But the sentence had already landed. The bride. My sister. I looked down at the carpet, a dark patterned hotel weave I probably would never have noticed under ordinary circumstances, and I let the information settle without fighting it. There are moments when denial still tries to reach for you out of habit. This was not one of them. The facts were becoming too structured, too external, too documented to argue with. I asked one question. "Does Marcus know?" Eric said, "Not yet. We've informed event leadership that dinner service has been delayed because of a kitchen concern. We have not explained beyond that." Daniel stood up then and moved toward the window, folding one arm across his chest. He was thinking. I knew that posture. It meant the next part mattered. After a few seconds, he turned back and said, "We need to stay ahead of sequence." Eric looked at him. "What do you mean?" Daniel answered the way he always did when he was laying out a response plan. "First, preserve the plate, the bottle, and the service logs." Eric nodded. Already in motion. "Second, preserve all kitchen and corridor footage before anything loops or gets overwritten." Done. Third, identify whether anyone communicated guest seating, allergy notes, or table assignments directly to the kitchen outside normal service process. Eric wrote that down immediately. Then Daniel added, and fourth, before the bride is confronted, the groom needs to be separated from the reception environment and informed privately. If she realizes what's happening before that, she'll shape the story first. The room went quiet again. It was such a measured statement. No emotion. No outrage. Just order. Eric looked at Daniel with a kind of tired respect and said, "That makes sense." Daniel glanced at me once, briefly. I understood what he was doing. Silence had gotten us this far. Now sequence would have to carry the rest. A few minutes later, hotel security received a message through their radio. Marcus had been quietly asked to step away from the ballroom and was being escorted to a private conference room on the mezzanine level. Eric asked me gently, "Mrs. Brooks, do you want to be present when he's informed?" I thought about Elena standing in the center of the ballroom under the flowers and lights. I thought about our father. I thought about the untouched plate with the lemon wedge on the rim. Then I shook my head. "No," I said. "Not yet." So Daniel went with them instead. And I stayed behind in the office, alone for the first time that evening, listening to the faint music through the wall and waiting for the next door to open. I was alone in the office for maybe 12 minutes. It felt longer. Without Daniel there, the room seemed overly bright and too still. I could hear the low mechanical hum of the air vent above me and, every so often, a burst of muffled sound from the ballroom down the corridor, music, applause. The blurred shape of voices continuing with a celebration that no longer existed in the way it had an hour earlier. I sat at the desk for a while, then stood, then sat again. On the edge of the banquet manager's desk was a printed event packet in a clear sleeve. I could see the reception timeline through the plastic: cocktail hour, grand entrance, first course, speeches, main course, cake cutting. Everything arranged in 15-minute blocks, every detail set in sequence, as if sequence itself could keep people honest. It made me think about our father. Not in a dramatic way, just clearly. He was the kind of man who labeled folders and kept old utility bills clipped together in a drawer no one else used. During the years I helped him, I used to sit at his dining room table and sort documents into stacks while he asked from the next room whether I had found the blue folder, not the navy one, the blue one. Some people would have found that tiring. I didn't. Order calmed him. It calmed me too. That was probably why, sitting in that small office, I stopped thinking in terms of heartbreak and started thinking in terms of record. There was the allergy notice. There was the seating chart. There was the plated dish. There was the chef's statement. There would be camera footage. I said those things silently to myself as if I were placing them in a row. Then I waited. When the door finally opened, Daniel stepped in first. Behind him was Marcus. He looked different than he had at the altar only a few hours earlier. Not messy, not dramatic. Just altered in the quiet way people look when they have been given information that rearranges their understanding faster than they can process it. His jacket was unbuttoned now. His tie had been loosened slightly. His face had gone pale around the mouth. He closed the door gently behind him. For a second, none of us said anything. Then he looked at me and said, "Claire, I am so sorry." His voice was low and rough, but controlled. I stood up. "You didn't know?" I asked. He shook his head immediately. No, I believed him almost at once, not because I was being generous, but because of the way he answered. There was no performance in it. No defensive pacing. No quick explanation designed to protect his position. Just shock and a kind of shame that had nowhere useful to go. Daniel remained near the door, giving space but not distance. Marcus swallowed once and said, "The hotel manager showed me part of the footage. Not all of it. Enough." Elena spoke with the chef near service. Then they checked the seating diagram. He stopped, pressed his hand briefly against the back of a chair, and started again. I also saw a message on her phone. My chest tightened. What message? He looked at Daniel first, then back at me. She had left her phone in the bridal room during photographs earlier. I picked it up after they asked me to step aside because I thought maybe her mother or planner would be calling. There was a draft note open. Not a text. A note. He took a slow breath. It listed numbers. I did not interrupt him. Your father's estate. Percentages. The amount she believed she would receive if things changed. He said the last part carefully. He did not say if you died. He did not need to. Daniel asked, "Did you photograph it?" Marcus nodded. Yes. Hotel security asked me not to touch anything else after that, so I handed them the phone. But I took one picture before I did. That was Daniel's kind of evidence. Time-stamped. Preserved. Hard to argue with. Marcus reached into his inside jacket pocket and pulled out a folded handkerchief, not to wipe his face, just to hold. A small thing to do with his hands. I married her less than 3 hours ago, he said quietly. And now I'm standing in a service office trying to understand whether she planned to kill your sister during dinner. No one answered. Some statements do not need an answer. They only need room. He looked at me again. I would never have gone through with today if I knew anything like this. I need you to know that. I do, I said. And I meant that too. A few minutes later, the banquet manager returned with hotel security and one police officer from the local precinct. Just one at first. Hotels prefer order, and order usually arrives one careful step at a time. The officer introduced herself, sat down across from us, and asked for a factual timeline. That phrase again helped me. A factual timeline. So I gave her one. I described the wedding day from the beginning, but only the relevant pieces. My allergy. My sister's knowledge of it. Daniel's observation. The plated fish. Our decision not to confront anyone directly. The hotel office. The confirmation from the chef. I did not speculate. I did not explain motive beyond what was already documented. Daniel gave his statement next. He was precise in the same way he had been all night. Time. Position. Bottle. Plate. Seating reference. Sequence. Marcus then described the draft note and what security had already viewed. The officer wrote everything down. Then she asked whether I wanted to pursue a formal complaint. It was the easiest question of the evening. Yes, I said. Not because I felt strong. I didn't. Not especially. I felt tired and strangely hollow. But some things become simple once enough facts accumulate around them. My role was no longer to interpret my sister's intentions generously. My role was to answer the question in front of me. Yes. The rest unfolded with the slow inevitability of process. Hotel security preserved the food sample and kitchen materials. The chef gave his statement. The planner produced the guest allergy sheet. My name was on it, highlighted. The seating chart confirmed my place setting. Footage from the service corridor showed Elena stopping the chef and pointing toward the floor plan before the plated meals went out. Another angle captured the chef returning to the prep counter and lifting a small bottle from a lower shelf. By then, the ballroom had already been informed that the reception was ending early due to a serious venue issue. Guests began leaving in clusters of confusion and embarrassment, holding evening wraps over formal clothes, speaking in hushed tones near the valet stand. My mother, I later learned, was told only that there had been a catering emergency and that she needed to come home. Elena asked for me twice. I did not go to her. Near midnight, after formal statements had been taken and the hotel had turned over its initial materials, Daniel and I were finally allowed to leave. As we walked through the parking structure, the air smelled like concrete dust and cooling engines. My shoes made a hard, regular sound on the painted surface. Daniel carried my wrap over one arm and the small emergency folder the police had given us in the other. Inside the car, before he started the engine, he looked at me and said, "You don't have to decide anything else tonight." That was exactly the right sentence. Not forgiveness. Not anger. Not family. Not tomorrow. Anything else tonight. I leaned my head back against the seat and closed my eyes for a moment. Outside, somewhere above us, I could still see the top floors of the hotel glowing against the dark California sky. The wedding was over. What remained now would move through records, lawyers, interviews, and dates on a calendar. And for the first time since Daniel told me not to eat, I understood that the truth no longer depended on memory. It was in the system now. The next morning was quiet. Daniel woke before I did, which was normal for him. Firefighters live by early alarms even on their days off. When I came into the kitchen, he was already at the table with a mug of coffee and a notepad open in front of him. Sunlight was coming through the window above the sink in that soft California way that makes ordinary things look calmer than they feel. I poured tea and sat down across from him. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. Then he slid the notepad slightly toward me. It wasn't dramatic. Just a few lines written in his careful block lettering. Police report number. Hotel case reference. Attorney contact. Evidence request timeline. Simple things. Order again. Everything is moving forward, he said. I nodded. The previous night had already begun turning into documentation. The hotel had called early that morning to confirm that the kitchen samples were preserved and that their legal department had opened a formal review. The police officer had sent a brief message confirming that statements were filed and that investigators would request additional footage and communication records. None of it felt loud or dramatic. Just steady. My mother called around mid-morning. She had been told very little the night before, and when she asked if I could come by, I said yes. Daniel drove. My parents' house looked the same as it always had. Pale yellow siding. A trimmed front hedge. The same wind chime near the porch that had been there since I was in college. Inside, my mother sat at the dining table holding a cup she hadn't touched. She looked tired. What happened last night? She asked quietly. I sat down across from her and explained it carefully. Not every detail, but enough that the structure made sense. The allergy. The plate. The investigation. The evidence. She listened without interrupting. At one point, she closed her eyes briefly and pressed her fingers against her forehead. I should have noticed something was wrong with her, she said eventually. I reached across the table and took her hand. This wasn't something you could notice, I said. And that was the truth. People like to believe warning signs are always obvious afterward. Most of the time they aren't. They look like ordinary conversations, small resentments, questions that seem casual until they aren't. My mother cried for a few minutes. Not loudly. Just the kind of quiet crying people do when the shape of their family changes faster than they can adjust. Daniel gave us space and stepped outside onto the porch. Later that afternoon, Marcus called. His voice sounded steadier than the night before, but there was still disbelief underneath it. "I filed for annulment this morning," he said. I didn't know what to say to that. He continued, "The detectives asked me to send them the photo of the note from Elena's phone. I did that too." "Thank you," I said. There was a pause. "I'm sorry the happiest day we planned turned into this," he said. "So am I replied. After that, life began settling into a different rhythm. Lawyers handled most communication. Investigators requested additional statements. The hotel finalized their internal report confirming the ingredient and documenting the kitchen instruction that had been given. Eventually, the case moved forward the way legal matters always do, slowly, through schedules and hearings and evidence. I did not speak directly to Elena again during that time. Not because someone told me not to, because silence was the only boundary I had that still made sense. Weeks later, one quiet Saturday morning, Daniel and I were back in our kitchen doing the kinds of things that make a home feel steady again. He was wiping down the counter after breakfast. I was rinsing dishes at the sink while sunlight fell across the floor in long rectangles. For the first time since the wedding, my mind felt clear enough to notice the ordinary details again. The sound of water, the smell of coffee, the quiet street outside. I turned to him and said, "You saved my life that night." He shook his head slightly. "I noticed something," he said. "That's all." But I knew better. Noticing something is only the beginning. Acting calmly, preserving facts, moving step by step while everyone else is still inside the emotion of the moment, that is what changes outcomes. I dried my hands and leaned against the counter. "I'm glad you were there," I said. He smiled a little and reached for the kettle. Outside, a neighbor walked past with her dog, waving through the window the way people do when mornings are peaceful and nothing urgent is happening. Life had not returned to the version it once was, but it had returned to something stable. And sometimes that is enough. A few days later, a friend of mine from work called with a strange situation involving a property dispute and a family member who had suddenly changed his story about ownership documents. As she spoke, I found myself reaching for a notepad. Old habits, evidence, sequence. People sometimes assume stories like mine are rare. They aren't. They just usually begin quietly. If you made it this far with me tonight, thank you for listening. Stories like this remind us that calm thinking matters more than loud reactions. If you enjoyed this one, take a moment to like and subscribe, and tell me in the comments which city you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I always enjoy seeing how far these stories travel. And if you'd like another calm story before you go, 2 popular ones should be appearing on your screen right now.